Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the closing ceremony of the first ever Green Software Foundation Global Summit 2022. This is our second closing ceremony. My name is Sarah Su. I'm a site reliability engineer with Goldman Sachs. I'm also the chair for the Principles and Patterns project. And now I have Tammy and Anne here with me to co-host. Tammy?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tammy McClellan from Microsoft, and I'm on 3 of the 4 working groups for the Green Software Foundation, and I co-chair the community working group along with my host, Anne Curry. Anne?
Hi, my name is Anne Curry, and I work for Container Solutions. And as Tammy said, we co-host the communities working group of the Green Software Foundation.
Amazing. So before we kickstart this closing ceremony where we have jam-packed lightning talks and panels to demonstrate our commitment to green software, I want to give you a quick recap on what our mission is. So Green Software Foundation's mission is to create a trusted ecosystem of people, tooling, best practices of building green software. And we define green software as software that emits the least amount of carbon possible when it's performing its task. The foundation's vision is to change the culture of how we build software across the global tech industry, so sustainability becomes a core priority to software teams, just as important to things like reliability, performance, cost, or security. And now Tammy is going to highlight some of the projects.
Hello, everyone. It's been a very busy first year with lots of milestones and projects, and I'll just highlight and call some of them out. But you can feel free to go to our GitHub repo. All of the information is there for you to view. But some of the highlights include the Principles project that Sarah has worked on. We also have our SCI, our software carbon intensity project, which is our calculation for measuring carbon intensity in software. So we've completed version 1, and we're currently working on the next version. So we have a carbon aware SDK being led by Von Knight, and it's an SDK to enable the creation of carbon aware applications. We also have an open data project, an SCI open ontology, some awesome green software, which is a list of awesome green software. And then, of course, all the working groups that over the past year has worked incredibly hard. We have the community working group with myself and Anne. We also have a standards working group chaired by Abhishek Gupta and Henry Richardson. We have the open source working group, which is chaired by Chris Lloyd-Jones of Avanade and Dan Lewis Tokley. Then, of course, we have our podcast, Environmental Variables, orchestrated by Chris Adams from the Green Web Foundation. So go check out our GitHub repo and learn more about it. So, so the London regional event just ended. Sarah, Anne, how did that go?
Well, I was sick, so I didn't go, which was a bit of a shame because I really, up until now, the Green Software Foundation has been, I know, it's been a very online organization. So, which is unsurprising because we started in the middle of a pandemic. So we've been doing everything on Zoom and on Teams. The summits were the first time where we all really got to see one another in person and see how much shorter or taller everybody is than they seem to be on Zoom. So, I was kind of sad to miss that. But Sarah, you were there. How did it go?
Everyone was very tall. I mean, oh my God, my neck. The London Summit was absolutely amazing, and London Summit was co-hosted by 4 different organizations. There were speakers from Microsoft, Avanade, Accenture, and Goldman Sachs. And we sort of like just bring our audiences from what is green software, why we need to care about green software, like 101, to the very last session where we basically show them what kind of patterns, what are the actionable items they can directly apply to their software to kickstart their green software journey. So that was amazing. And we close off the day with like a panel where like each company have a representative to discuss the green future, what each company is trying to do, and how can we collectively make this trusted ecosystem to grow better and faster. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. Tammy, how was the one in Seattle?
It was fabulous. We had a lot of great in-person and online participation. A lot of folks from all over the areas kind of converged to talk about green software, and it was really nice to be among like-minded individuals. We had university students, and the afternoon was a design thinking workshop. And so it was very interactive and very energizing. So it was fabulous.
That is so great to hear. So Anne and I actually met maybe a month ago in person because Asin was giving Asin, who's the chairperson of the foundation. Let's just so in case you don't know him, but he's really famous in this world. Anyway, so we met him for the first time, and Anne and I were just both thinking like, how do we exactly to increase engagement, right? And it was like, the summit is coming up, and then the summit was happening across like 20 cities, hosted like by 20 different organizers, like covering so many different speakers and talks. So it was such a great way for us to actually kickstart the community working group, which both of you are co-chairing. So like, is there anything else that you want to let our audience know? Like, how do we actually get them involved and start contributing?
Well, at the end, we'll be putting up a whole list of ways that you can get involved. And one of the things that we won't be talking about at the end, but I will probably say something about now and then, which is follow the GSF community at GSF community on Twitter, because we need to do more with that, because that's a way of kind of doing real-time outreach to folk. Because we're a community of organisations, but we're also a community of individuals. And as we say right now, we're at early stage. We're more like a startup than we are an established enterprise and established organisation. So it would be really good to build some more of those relationships.
That sounds great. And we're going to have a great closing ceremony today. We've got an action-packed agenda for you. And there it is, our agenda slide. So we have lots of pre-recorded conversation with you. We have a panel that is going to be tremendously inspirational and energizing. And we also have lightning talks that we will go through as well. Yeah. So, and then of course, we'll move into the discussion and networking segment of the closing ceremonies, and then we'll have our closing remarks at the end. So Sarah, over to you.
So now we're going to watch our pre-recorded lightning talks where Anne is actually one of the panelists.
Welcome, my name is Asim Hussain, and I'm excited today to host a panel with guests from the Green Software Foundation.
Hi there, I'm Chris Lloyd-Jones.
Hi there, my name's Chris Adams. Oh, sorry, Anne.
And hi, I'm Anne Curry.
Hi, Elise Alakowski.
Awesome, I've got some wonderful, interesting questions, hopefully, for all of you. I'd love to hear your opinions on very interesting topics around green software. My first question is, what's driving? I personally have experienced a lot more interest in this space in kind of the last year at the very least. What do you think is driving interest in green software across the industry? Chris Lloyd-Jones, why don't you go ahead with that one?
Sure. So for me, I think it's the growing understanding from individuals that our way of life needs to be greener, to be sustainable, and to be resilient. And now there's a lot of talk from governments and around setting targets and policies, and those are very important. but green software lets every individual make an impact and make a difference, which I think is a differentiator from all the other initiatives that are going on.
Yeah, really good point. I feel there's a groundswell movement across the world as well. Yes. Elise, what's your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would echo that and just say, I mean, I think that technologists today are growing up with more and more real sort of impacts from climate change. They're seeing them manifested in ways that are really impacting how they experience the world around them and how they think about their future. And, you know, this organizations like the Green Software Foundation that really provide a forum to take action and to feel like you have agency to really make a change, and sort of really not just to make a change broadly, but make a change in what you're building every day. It really gives people a sense of the power to change. And I think that is one of the most exciting things about the Green Software Foundation. I also just think that, you know, organizations are increasingly adopting ESG frameworks. I think there's more and more accountability expectations around that. And of course, organizations that have an outsized emissions footprint from their IT, right, are going to be looking at green software as one of the big opportunities to make an impact.
Yeah, wonderful. That's definitely aligned to my thinking as well. So given the fact that organizations, you know, they're interested in green software, but they need to adopt, you know, processes, principles, patterns of engineering in order to greenify their software and reduce the emissions of software. What's needed in your mind for organizations to adopt these patterns and principles? Chris Adams, what's your thoughts in that area?
I think there's so the really a big one, right, is capacity. Like organizations having the skills in-house to do this. And you know how when like Ruby on Rails might have come out and then people are saying, I want a Ruby on Rails developer with 10 years experience when the framework's only a year old. We are kind of seeing something a little bit like that right now, where various organizations are trying to hire and ask for this stuff, and they're not quite sure what they're after. And we have this kind of shortage right now. So if anything, there's a real need to have some kind of way to provide, to kind of get this level of skill and competency up quite high, actually. And I think this is something you've spoken about quite a lot, actually, as well.
Yes, yeah, because we have to make sure that being green doesn't conflict with developer productivity in anybody's mind, because in the end, developer productivity will always win. There are hardly any developers that compared to how many we need in the industry. We need more, and so everybody wants to use them to deliver on business goals, not kind of climate goals, really. So so one thing that I think will really help, and is definitely helping at the moment, is where you get open source or cloud providers who are offering services that are both good for developer productivity and also greener. The more we can raise the profile of that and push it, the more likely we are to get take up. Because what we cannot ask people to do, because they will not do it, I've asked them so many times over the years, we can't get people to rewrite their applications in C or Rust, or making things more efficient is too expensive for people in terms of time. So we need to find services that will do it for them, make it the default, make it no effort for them, or in fact, less effort for them to choose those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that one of the challenges is that we're either talking about software that hasn't been written, and the vast majority of software which needs to be written has not been written yet. We are very, very early stages in this whole industry we're in right now. But there is also this legacy software that exists that we just have to figure out how do we manage that. And rewriting that in a new language is not an option that, you know, that flies these days. But there is new developments happening, and maybe some of that stuff will fly if you made those choices earlier on. One of the things, Chris, I just thought, I don't know if you have any opinions on this, or whether you've seen anything else on the horizon. I was very, very delighted to see, I think just yesterday or the day before, there are several, you know, job roles out there. I saw some for Amazon of a sustainable solutions architect, and I am starting to see more and more And I know some of your organizations have roles, you know, with the title, green in the title. I mean, what do you see in terms of the job market regarding kind of our space? Do you see a lot of growth in this area?
So basically, I think that there are people who, there is definitely interest in this, often at a kind of executive level and often at a kind of developer and the kind of in the trenches level. But the part in the middle, people aren't quite sure how to kind of prioritize it or even ask for it or even specify it right now. So like people asking, like, well, how do I buy a greener version of any kind of service right now? There's a real gap there right now. And I think even at the architectural level, we don't really have the language yet, or it's not that common to really kind of talk about the trade-offs you might be doing. So like I might be to do this, I could do one thing here which takes advantage of how the energy markets have totally changed over the last 10 years to change the economics, right? But I don't know how to talk about the trade-offs that I might make in order to unlock that stuff. And I think you kind of need this capacity or these abilities at the design level right now before you can kind of get to the implementation part. That's what I feel is a real kind of gap right now. Until we have like an iron triangle for things like greener software, for example, or this stuff here, I think we're going to struggle to have like informed decisions about how you're going to spend a developer's time budget or an actual cash money budget on things. And I think that's the thing that's probably one of the big gaps I see in the next 6 to 12 months that needs to be kind of plugged, I suppose.
I just want to weigh in on the chasm there. One thing that I've noticed is that some organizations are starting to see this as an either or, that you either focus on sustainability in your business model and circular economy, or you do green software, whereas actually the personas and the people doing these things are very different. I think you can have sustainability in your technology and sustainability with technology. And I think organizations don't need to take that kind of zero-sum approach to focusing on where they need to change.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And I think that's the interesting question is there is a gap. There's a gap between different types of roles, but there's also a gap between, as you mentioned, Chris, CIO to in the trenches. They're in the middle. There's kind of this knowledge gap, and once that gets filled, then the rest of the roles and the understanding will spread throughout an organization. But then that leads to one of my favorite questions, which is where will change come from? I think there's been lots of attention, thought, strategy, attempts in the past, going kind of top down, CIO, CEO, down to the further down an organization, and there's been other attempts going from maybe more, I call it in the trenches, on the front lines, let's say. Oh God, so all these awful war metaphors, we need to stop using them. Up the chain. Where do you think the kind of main driver for adoption of green software will come from? Which direction? I'm going to ask at least this question first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Sort of one of the unique features of and dare I say our theory of change, right, at the Green Software Foundation, is that we can create kind of a groundswell movement here of technologists who are really driving change. But of course, there needs to be support structures in place, right? And there needs to be enablement from CIOs and other members of the team. And to the point that was just made, you know, there needs to be kind of a systems approach to think about things as integrated, right? This is not, you know, an either or scenario. We need to kind of look at strategies that embed sustainability approaches throughout the entire, you know, IT, the IT the space within the company. But I think that that CIOs are increasingly understanding that they play a role in an organization's sustainability ambitions. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think ESG is part of that. Regulation sort of driving more expectations around environmental performance. But I think that I am excited about the Green Software Foundation for the very reason that I think this is about a movement of technologists who are really sort of coming up with innovative, creative ways to address this problem. And so the next sort of step, or the way we need to take this forward, is get CIOs to the table and say, now how do we sort of come together and think about mutual benefit? How do we sort of make this a systems approach within the organization to tackle all the different parts that we need to tackle?
Yeah, a holistic approach. We need everybody at the table, but yeah, they're definitely there. The Anne, I know you have certain opinions on this.
I do. I'm a big believer in the middle managers as being the kind of the secret key to this. Because in the 10 years ago in the financial services industry, when they wanted to try and stop everybody being cowboys, and there'd just been a huge financial crash or whatever, and they wanted everybody to behave a bit better, they realized that actually the key to that was the middle managers, because people at the bottom might have enthusiasm, but they didn't really have the power to make any changes. And they were all young, they didn't really know how to do it. People at the top would quite often get on board and say, yeah, we want to do this. But everybody assumed they were just lying in the middle and would just stamp on all the projects as soon as they got anywhere. So it's kind of senior architects, middle managers. Otherwise, they have a tendency to just kill everything. Often for good reason, because they know that loads of projects get kicked off that are actually bad for the business, and their job is usually to keep the business alive and running and operating, and not easily, not because the CEO's neighbor once said that they thought this was a good idea, so everybody has to drop everything and do it. They're there to protect from that and kill those projects. So we need to persuade them, otherwise everything's is stone dead. So yeah, we need, it's, as Elise said, it's holistic. Everybody has to be convinced, and we can't leave them to the end or they'll stop everything. Often for good reason.
Look, according to Anne, we should fire all the CIOs and middle management jobs to say no. Okay, got it. So Chris Adams, were you about to put your hand up? Yeah,
I was indeed. Yeah, like a little schoolboy. I think there's actually, I think it's worth looking at the role that policymakers have been playing in this in here, and we can also look to other places where people started introducing things like what you might refer to as, well, not really non-functional requirements, but like other kind of key kind of indicators of quality. And you might think about things like, say, accessibility. If you look how accessibility was something which has now become relatively mainstream in terms of like working. Yeah, you had a push at a kind of regulatory level where people would say every single website built with public sector money now has to meet a minimum level. But you also needed something like ways to convert those ideas into something that people can act upon. Like if you have like a web content accessibility guidelines, you've got PAW, which is like, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. You kind of need something like that for green software right now to make it a bit easier for people to manage success in this. And so like basically a product manager or someone is able to kind of accept something and say, yeah, this is actually meeting these criteria here. And right now, we don't quite have that, but it would be really lovely to have something like that to make it a bit easier for the people who are at that mid-level to essentially guide people along the way, or at least tell when something is actually hitting the targets they think it's supposed to be hitting, for example.
Mm-hmm. So we need the C-level to say yes. We need the middle management to say yes, but also have the knowledge and the tools and the information to be able to guide and drive and drive work in the right direction. I also think it's interesting about the accessibility aspect of it. A lot of people assume that a lot of accessibility arguments don't have financial benefits. There's huge financial benefits to accessibility arguments. I mean, it's like on some circumstances, it's a significant percentage of your customer base is someone who is differently. And because it can also be temporal as well, like because you can maybe have a baby so if you don't have one arm for like 6 months. Yeah. Well,
this is the thing actually seemed like, I mean, so Microsoft did have some stuff like this, which is quite helpful when they spoke about things like situational, positional kind of disabilities. That is actually really useful in having the vocabulary to actually realize that there are benefits in lots of other places. We don't quite have that language in like technology right now, but it does exist. People do talk about co-benefits all the time. You can talk about greening electricity, for example, and saving literally millions of lives each year that would otherwise be cut short with like particulate matter. There's all these things you can talk about, and there's arguments you can make to say, well, maybe your staff might want to hang around more if they feel like they're part of the good side with using advanced humane things rather than this really, really weird 20th century kind of stuff from before. Like there's all this stuff that we could be talking about. And I don't know about you, but I think most developers would rather build Star Trek than build Mad Max. And I think this is like a way to talk about this, right? Yeah.
That is true. I'd say that even with the code benefits you're talking about, I mean, that's kind of the values driven. It is the right thing to do. I think the thing around green software, there's almost a pragmatic business case without kind of wanting to relate everything back to money. If you reduce electricity in a data center, you reduce spend. Right. If you reduce consumption in the cloud, you reduce spend. So much as I think we should do this because it's the right thing to do, if it does come down to a business case for the bottom line, for the pound, the dollar, the euro, there's also going to be a very strong, almost linear correlation between reduced carbon and reduced money. And you can invest that in training, I think, to then help those middle managers stop squashing all these projects.
Yeah, no, that's right. The optimization is key. And I think that gets back to that point where, you know, companies with sort of outsized impact, right, from their IT are moving more quickly to kind of look at where those opportunities are, right? There's like, oh, there's sort of environmental benefits, right? But there's also that big cost saving opportunity when you take this on. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, Chris, you've got your hand up. Go for it.
I was going to say, so this is the thing that, again, we can look from other sectors that do things like this. Like if you value something, then you can literally value it. You can price it. Like you see organizations doing this all the time. Like I'm going to point to Microsoft because they have done things like this. They have like an internal carbon price. So you've got a kind of carbon war chest for this cool green stuff, but they've also got things to say, well, maybe there's something which is actually we're struggling to kind of bring down the emissions, right? For example, like aviation, that's got a different internal carbon price. So you can price things to actually do this. And like, this is literally what Boeing have been doing for like 20 to 30 years to achieve weight savings. They basically automatically give any engineer a kind of budget that they're able to spend to buy weight savings. And I think you can do these kind of stuff. There's all these management patterns that are like used in lots of places, which would work really well in this field. And now I'm going to hand over to Anne because I think she's got something to say here as well.
Yeah, because I totally disagree with all of you on this. So this is a good thing on the panel. I totally disagree with you. I don't think cost savings sell to enterprises because for them, the cost of developers exceeds cost of operating data. That's why they moved to the cloud, because they're willing to pay more in order to give their developers less work to do. So I don't think that's an argument that having said that, I think it is an argument that can be made and is convincing if you operate a data center, because their cost of running the electricity cost is is a really key part of your business costs. But so aviation fuel is a really key part of your business cost. You will go out of business if you spend too much on aviation fuel, but you will not go out of business in the tech industry because you spend too much money on your data center. You go out of business because your key business, whatever it is, isn't generating the income you want it to. It's not your number one priority.
I think it depends on who you're speaking to, though. The C-suite level, for sure, that's not going to make an impact. But again, I'm going to use your analogy of middle managers. If you're looking at your spend and you looked at what the spend was before, and you're seeing your use of functions, be that an Azure or Lambda function spiking, and you see your app services, I think even if it might not materially impact the business, those people panic. So having a way to see that they can keep their costs in check, and also, I guess, sell upwards, manage upwards, that they're being green, doing the right things. I'm not actually saying it's a key business driver, but it helps those people make decisions, which might be a bit Machiavellian, maybe.
I think I'll put a point here just to I think it's a co-benefit, and I think that's one of the things. There's multiple vectors in making decisions. I think I do agree with Anne to a certain degree that I think if it's the only argument you're putting forward, it won't land. But if you're saying it's got this benefit, it is greener, it's faster, it's more reliable, all those things added together, I do think it adds. It's not nothing.
So here's I've got something I
Chris.
want to add on here, because when I talk about pricing something, I'm not necessarily saying the cost of a compute, for example. You can cost things in all these different ways, and there's a whole set of management theory all around cost of delay, which is like, what is the cost of us not shipping this product, for example, the day before? Okay, let's choose a bad example, like Black Monday or something like that, right? That is a clear cost of doing that, right? And that's what I'm talking about. We price things accordingly. And if you're able to talk about this, and if you accept that in many cases organizations are driven by numbers, if you can translate these into that incredibly reductive single one dimension that helps you make it argue for something, then I think that's actually useful. And we have patterns for doing this kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily the cost of compute, it's the cost of the opportunity cost of what you could be doing otherwise. For example, you can express these in numerical form, and people make lots and lots of money building models and designing and managing this way anyway. So I think that you could apply this to carbon, because there are absolutely consequences. Well, the science spells out there are consequences for us not pricing in carbon into how we work. And I'm going to hand over to Ange, because she had her hand up now, actually.
Oh, me, blimey, I can't remember what I was going to say now.
I can. I have a point which maybe you can. I think this is a really interesting topic, and I have a feeling we could be here for quite a while talking about this particular one. But I think quite a related one is because one of the arguments that if you're working for a for-profit organization, it's money. It's that's the purpose of the organization, is to make a profit. It's a for-profit organization. But there's other aspects of the world. We have these free markets, but then hopefully we have regulations and regulatory authorities that can temper and control the excesses perhaps of a free market economy. What are some? So we talked a lot about if there was just a money argument, just a market-driven money argument, what could happen? What are some regulatory policies that, if they came out, would help accelerate the adoption of not just green software, but more sustainable tech solutions? Oh, Anne's got a hand up straight away. Let's go.
Actually, oddly enough, that was what I was going to talk about before. If we cast our mind back to, we talked earlier about accessibility, and that's useful for generating additional customers and things. But actually, I remember at the time I was head of IT for a lingerie company, and the main argument for why we should make the site accessible was that the SEO was better. Google used to give you an SEO boost if you were accessible. So, and that was one of the key performance indicators that they had, which was where are you in Google? So that was a top line item for every C-suite business discussion. So you could easily say, well, we have to be accessible because it'll move us up through Google, and that was the reason why. It was clearly measurable thing. I think people really cared about, and I also used to work for companies like Microsoft, and for them, the reason to go for accessibility was that there were government mandates on accessibility standards that a lot of applications had to pass. So that was, well, you just cannot sell into the US government, which is a key customer that you want, if you don't meet these levels. So if we had something like that again, that would be effective. I mean, in the past that was effective, and I think it would be effective again. So how do we get those kind of like both business, so Google provided the push through the SEO, and government provided the push through, you have to have meet these standards in order to sell to us. That was effective.
I think that's a good point. Chris, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so like this is currently happening in Germany and in Hong Kong already. So this I think last month, the first ever eco-certified software was granted the German Blau Engel or Blue Angel certificate. And one of the reasons that people were doing that was because in government, which in many cases have legally binding targets to reduce emissions, they need to have a thing to ask for. So now you see that, and there is now a German project called Software, which is like soft aware, but with a kind of German accent. What that does, that's basically something a bit like continuous integration, checking every single time. Are you moving forward or moving backwards in terms of the actual missions associated with any of the things you're doing? So there are loads of efforts like this, but it's still early days. There's Germany and there's Hong Kong, but no one else has any certifications yet. But there's like a loose network of like 28 different countries who are trying to figure out what to be asking for, so that when they put a big fat procurement tender in, they can say, I need this to be, I don't know, instead of perceivable, operable, understandable, and oh Christ, robust, maybe green, open, lean, decentralized, gold, something like that. We need to have things like that for it, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that's right, the role of the Green Software Foundation, right, is we have this forum to help drive and sort of bring kind of alignment, right, to this question of like, what does good look like, and what should we be really aiming for as a community? And I think our approach and our processes, are based on transparent principles, right, and really about, let's get everyone at the table and really talk about this in an open forum. And so I think that regulation is key, but we need to sort of get to a place where we start to drive that alignment on, hey, this is kind of a good standard, and keep building, as you say, Chris, more sort of visibility and awareness in this space.
Yeah, wonderful. I will say it. So it sounds like even when it comes to government influence, it is also the fact that we're still coming back to money, because it's like, where is the government going to spend its money? But I think that will evolve to something hopefully a bit closer to policy and regulation. And I would also say that the Google SEO example, that was a policy for accessible. That's a policy. It sounds like that was a Google policy. That was a decision that they made. I don't know. We probably had some. I don't know the background of that decision, so I'm just guessing. But it was a decision that they made which drove a lot of action from a lot of organizations, and that's why these things are such great levers to pull, because a small change can have a big impact. As we're kind of reaching the end of the panel, we might have gone over a little bit, but I just wanted to ask each of you, what advice do you have for someone looking to start having conversations regarding green software in their orgs, or even just in their communities? Let's start with you, Chris Lowe-Jones. Do you have any advice for people?
So for me, it would be about identifying that business case to support green software, but also understanding your culture. I mean, focusing, again, going to repeat it, on that middle management example, I do think you need to know what your organization is motivated by and be quite honest about that. If you are a pragmatic organization, cost or one of the other drivers Chris mentioned will be important. For some organizations, it being the right thing to do will be enough to start these conversations. You need that organizational support to have that driver to support adoption. You also need a sponsor, because without that buy-in, it will be difficult to encourage teams to actually adopt these new practices, go out for training. Like Anne was saying, if you're taking away from developer productivity, there has to be a really strong reason for that. So that's the top down. I think the other thing I would say to start having conversations would be grassroots advocacy, meet other like-minded individuals. Those would be my two main ones.
Great piece of advice, Chris. Anne, what's your thoughts?
Well, my thought would be, remember, you have consumer power. Almost everyone in the tech industry has consumer power to make change. So yes, when you're buying stuff, or when you're thinking about buying stuff, talk to your suppliers and say, I care about this. And this is something that will make the difference between whether I buy from you or I buy from somebody else. Because if you can then get them to go and change their products, either immediately or just because it's the feedback they're getting from their customers, that will have outsized impacts without you having to do anything at all or get any internal sign-off. Just ask for it.
Great, absolutely. Use your wallet. Chris Adams, what's your thoughts?
I'm actually going to agree with a lot of what Anne just said. There's a whole phenomena called the values perception gap that's common in psychology, where everyone basically assumes that everyone else doesn't care about anything until they ask them and realize that they do care about things. And like, until you do that and are explicit about that, or explicitly give a team permission to do this, or explicitly talk to someone, they'll basically assume that you do not care. And if you don't do that, then, well, we're kind of here because everyone is assuming that no one else cares and no one is prepared to ask, like, can you please do it, cloud provider? Or, hey team, do you reckon people might want to join us if like we look more like the good guys rather than the bad guys? There's all this stuff that we could be doing. And I feel like a lot of the time is basically be very explicit about this, about what you're after and what your values actually are. Lead with your values in many cases, but back them up with some numbers that you can come up to justify when someone is challenging you later on.
Wonderful, yeah. And I will just add to that. I do know, I do work for one of those large cloud providers, and I will say that the sales orgs, it is flagged. It is put in a database when a customer reaches out and complains about anything, but like specifically, there's you know, if the request or suggestion is around sustainability, it is flagged and it does go in a database, which is brought up in discussions. Elise, let's finally with you. Like, what's your guidance?
Yeah, I would say all great points, and all part of the kind of systems thinking that needs to be applied here, of sort of activating, right, sort of different stakeholders and levers within an organization. You know, I can speak, you know, specifically to ThoughtWorks. You know, one of the things that I have found, you know, we are a very decentralized culture, we're a very agile culture. And it's been so important for us to find champions in different parts of the business and then do the education and training and bring them along. And we've learned a lot from our participation already in the foundation. But just getting enough people who are starting to spread the word, you know, sort of in a frankly in a grassroots, right, sort of like pollinating different parts of the business. So suddenly you have this sort of like, oh, I'm hearing about this over here. Oh, and I'm hearing about this over there. And then as you're sort of building that business case that Chris is talking about, you know, and putting it together, you've already sort of primed, the organization culturally and kind of gotten enough momentum building that I feel like you can just move then more quickly and gain more momentum. But definitely, I feel like that grassroots piece has been very important at ThoughtWorks. Even though we're a very purpose-led company, it's just the way our organization works. You need to kind of do that pollination.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. I think that one of the things people don't realize about Microsoft is it has one of the largest kind of green teams of any organization in the world. I think we're almost 6,000 people now in the organization, kind of actively sit and participate and talk and make it very, very clear that sustainability is of value to them. And I think that's a strong signal to everybody else in an organization, to the middle management and the CTOs and the CIOs, that, you know, if they were to make a decision around sustainability, it would be supported. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of your opinions. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you, for being part of this panel, and thank you for being part of the foundation. Your guidance and support and your knowledge is instrumental in us achieving our mission and our goals. And thank you all. And yeah, we'll close out the panel discussion here. Thank you all.
Wonderful.
Hurrah.
Thanks so much.
What a great discussion that was. I really liked a lot of the points that were mentioned, but something that really resonated with me was where did change come from? And the movement of technologists holistically to come up with creative ways to reduce carbon in software. The opportunity to make an impact is huge right now. And you made some really great points in the panel discussion. Anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, I say this over and over again until people are blue in the face. I say, actually, it's kind of a, I think almost this is, I don't know if you've heard the phrase, get your fuzzies and your utilons separately. Elise said something about this, systems thinking. Don't treat this as an individual. Anything you do individually will be hard and you'll feel like you're doing a lot, but actually it's less effective than not acting as an organization rather than an individual, and actually probably doing a lot less work. Things like just raising it with your suppliers really, really pays off. I think it's massively outsized in its effect. Yeah, I'd love to get everybody to rewrite everything in C, but that is not going to happen.
Not today.
That was really great. I love like how you basically just, I disagree. And then that really showed like a contrast of thinking, and then like how we came from, we all started at the same place, but there are so many different methodologies and different ways for us to achieve the same goal. And I guess that's quite a nice lead to the next part of the closing ceremony, where we are going to watch the pre-recorded lightning talks. I think there are about 7 of them, and then they are covered by members across the globe of the Green Software Foundations. So yeah, enjoy that.
Hello, I'm Bill Johnson. I'm a principal engineering manager at Microsoft, and I work in the Office for the Web organization. I also do a lot of contributions to our sustainability efforts here at Microsoft and work with the Green Software Foundation as well. And so there's so many great projects out there and ideas and different approaches to green software and sustainable software that one of the most common questions I get is, how do I apply this to my specific system or the setup that I have? And so for me, you got to start at the principles, and that's kind of the key and the foundation to set everything else up. And thankfully, the Green Software Foundation has already defined software engineering principles as well as some green design principles. And so when you take these principles, you can apply them to create patterns to then follow, and then apply these patterns to your system. So that sounds simple enough, right? Well, I don't know about you, but my calendar is typically pretty busy. And so I don't have a lot of time to go and just redesign my entire system. And for you, maybe it's not time, maybe it's some other factor like the money that it takes or the resources on your team, or maybe you don't have the data or just priority to go and do something like this. And so to build something from new, that's easy or easy-ish to apply these principles. But how do you do this for all the software that's running in the world or across your team now? That's a much trickier problem and thing to solve. So I like to frame this as a pyramid. So the first thing that you do is you start where you always start. You start with measuring. You start with data. You can't change what you don't measure. And so if you're on any of the public clouds right now, there's typically some sort of service that will tell you your cost and how to optimize those costs. Cost is a fantastic proxy to your carbon emissions. It's tricky sometimes to get the specific carbon emission, but you can use all these other proxies to kind of figure out what your emissions are. And so the more data, the better here. So whether it's, cost or utilization or how long it takes to render a page, all of these can start to tell you what your carbon intensity is for your system. And the more data, the better. So once you have some of this data, now you can start to take actions on this data and make some small adjustments to your service and your systems. You're probably doing some of these actions today, but things like shutting down old machines that aren't in use or deleting data that you don't need after 6 months or a year or longer. Maybe you started shifting machines and systems to other regions so that you can take advantage of some of the hydro and solar that's in the west coast of the US as opposed to the east coast of the US. All of these things are coming into what you can only use what you need and not anything more. So auto scaling, lazy loading, all these are tactics in order to use what you need and not waste resources that are available there. So now that you've taken some of these actions, you can step back and say, well, which ones of these have been the best actions? Which ones can we absorb as a team or organization, operationally, financially? And those best actions, now you can start to automate them. And this is the step that you take to start to make your system carbon aware, or in other words, how your system reacts to the natural fluctuations of carbon emissions that are in the world and our energy grid. Branch Magazine from Climate Action Tech, they actually do a really good job of this on their site by adjusting their design, and they'll show higher resolution images during high carbon or lower carbon intensity and lower resolutions during higher carbon intensity in order to save some of those emissions and react. You can also, if you started moving VMs to newer regions, can you automate that by when you do auto scaling, don't just scale the number of machines, scale where they go and automatically detect which region is running the most solar and wind and renewable energy today and move your machines dynamically there. In our industry, we keep a lot of data as well, and all that data needs to be stored somewhere, and it's stored as embodied carbon. And so that's not even accounting for the emissions to transfer that data there, to process and aggregate the data. So there's a lot of opportunity to do this and start to automate these things to keep your emissions low. Once you get through this layer, then you can step back finally and look at the overall architecture of your system. And these are going to be a lot more intense changes and often full redesigns. You know, serverless architectures and components to start swapping out pieces to move serverless. That's essentially 100% utilization. You're only using the compute when you need it and no more. Another interesting concept is edge computing. Like, can we push processing to client devices on the edge instead of running everything on the server and transferring back and forth? And even more so, maybe we don't want to push everything there because there's times where it's going to be a lower intensity to transfer it over and process on a machine. So understanding that and reacting to that dynamically and being able to do edge computing when you need it and when it's optimal and not when it's not optimal. So there's tons of interesting problems. This is a relatively new field, but there's some really cool things coming and a lot of interesting stuff that we have to try and solve as a group. So the Green Software Foundation has helped already to establish some clear principles. I know the patterns are coming out soon too, but this is the next step is where you come in, is these practices, is this next layer in the specific implementations into a specific system. This is where we take these patterns and really understand down to the details, the nuts and the bolts as to what needs to happen here. So whether you've been successful at this or unsuccessful at this, doesn't matter. Like, share these things out, talk about them, experiment, collaborate, contribute back to open source and the Green Software Foundation. This is where we need you to step in and really start to share so we can all learn from these experiences and learn much faster and hopefully save the planet in quicker than we are today. So thank you again for everyone for listening, and thank you to the Green Software Foundation for just putting on a fantastic event today. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of your own lessons and discoveries. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel. I work for ThoughtWorks as a software engineer and green tech lead for the European region. Today, I'll be sharing with you this talk that is titled Green Team Topologies. Carbon accountability is a mindset that takes different forms. Therefore, it is important to understand the basics of how teams are organized in a modern tech organization and what can they do to adopt and foster this mindset. What tools do they have? But why does all this matter? We are in a race against time. We as a species in global society need to work collaboratively towards keeping world temperatures below 1.5 degrees in order to keep life safe on this planet. This comes out of the IPCC report, and even though there are some easy to understand facts and figures out there, the nature of the problem is quite complex, and there are no easy or straightforward solutions. However, I do believe one thing, and that's that technology by itself won't save us. It will play a significant role, though, in this fight against climate change. But we need more. We need individual action from citizens and consumers being responsible in their daily lives. We need corporations using their platforms and influence to reduce emissions and foster innovation. And of course, we need public policy in place, making sure that everyone is being held accountable for their actions. You can see some of that action taking place in climate rallies. These are some of my colleagues at ThoughtWorks who took their climate demands to the streets, something to be very proud of. Now you may wonder, what does all this have to do with green software engineering? Well, just like we can hold politicians and companies accountable for their actions towards the environment, we can also develop a carbon accountable mindset as software engineers. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. How do we take action from the streets back into data work as technologists? You might be familiar with this framework called Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace. I highly recommend this reading, which in a nutshell tells us that successful organizations operate with these types of teams. I'll focus on 3 of them for the context of my talk, and those are Stream Align, Enabling, and Platform. Stream Align teams are the ones with which we are the most familiar, perhaps. As engineers, we are likely part of them, developing new features and maintaining existing ones for software products. In these teams, carbon accountability takes the form of considering sustainability as another architectural characteristic or cross-functional requirement, empowering our users to be more carbon aware. The first one aims to incorporate the mindset and the carbon efficiency within the team. It raises questions and concerns like, are we making sure we are deploying our cloud workloads in low carbon intensity regions? Are we following software development practices that reduce waste? Do we take into account green software engineering principles while developing new features? Are we provisioning our services with the right amount of CPU and memory? Do we understand how they behave under extreme load, how they scale? We should be able to answer some of these questions by bringing sustainability as another trade-off of architectural decisions. Empowering our users for carbon awareness is a slightly different approach. It's about the impact we can have on our users rather than on the technology we create. Some companies are tagging the products that are more carbon friendly in their e-commerce platforms, for example. Or maybe Google Maps would recommend you the most carbon efficient route between point A and point B. This is user empowerment. Platform teams play on a larger scale. They are internal teams who serve stream-aligned teams in order to make their work more efficient and smooth. Their job is to ensure that carbon optimizations apply across the whole organization, thus having a larger impact on metrics. This entails making sure that cost optimizations are prioritized. It's worth noting that we use cost as a proxy metric for optimizing carbon until we define a better one. They also need to think about services that provide support for stream-aligned teams and how optimal they are. Are networks well architected? Services being scaffolded and provisioned with energy-efficient instance types? Enabling customers with data means providing metrics observability to stream-aligned teams, making sure that cost and carbon metrics dashboards are accessible and utilized throughout the software development lifecycle. Last but not least, we have enabling teams. They will adopt a carbon accountable mindset by fostering the culture across the organization and making sure that everyone builds up related capabilities. They should also track and monitor the implementation of best practices and their adoption. FinOps teams are one of these, and concrete examples of their practices could be collaborating with product teams on cost visibility and cost attribution, making sure resources are tagged appropriately and shared costs are allocated optimally. Naturally, GreenOps emerges as a new field to explore, a new set of practices and a mindset to implement this carbon accountability. Now, the emergence and novelty of green software engineering makes definitions still a work in progress. I think for now, as we evolve and discuss further, we can think of green aggregation of team topologies as an organizational framework, FinOps as a cost optimizing culture, and sustainable software engineering as the technical discipline of architecting, developing, and operating software with a focus on carbon and energy efficiency, among other principles. Not so long ago, procurement and financial teams needed to allocate money and plan for infrastructure provisioning, and much of the engineering work consisted of optimizing services for that fixed capacity, so resources wouldn't be deprecated too soon. The cloud disrupted all that, and it enabled engineers to, as fast as they could, click on a button. Now, we can use that can scale out infinitely or infinite block storage, but all that comes at a price. We shouldn't leverage the full power of the cloud while being unconscious of the impact that it has on dimensions such as carbon emissions and cost. I guess my main takeaway for you is when we go back into our teams, whatever topology you work in, let's try to keep handy a cost and carbon optimizing mindset, a green ops mindset of everything we do. Let's reflect what's the optimal way to go, or at least the most efficient one with the information we have. We might not need to free up memory anymore, like in C language, for example, or use threads in cloud applications, but we still need to provision the workloads that we deploy in the cloud. So let's do that while thinking in the planet. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gaida Zirkelbach. I am the CEO and co-founder of Sustainabase. At Sustainabase, we help companies thrive in a low carbon and ESG economy. We give you real data with which you can make real strategies. And how do we do this? We do this through our software platform. It has everything that you need for effortless and dynamic management and reporting of your carbon emissions, your water, your waste, and more. And today I'm going to talk about why it's vital that green software companies map their operational emissions. I love the Green Software Foundation's mission to reduce global carbon emissions associated with software. as well as the foundation advocating for choosing emissions reductions versus offsetting when that's possible. To do this, the foundation says that they want us to consider how to minimize carbon emissions in every decision we make. And we've found, after working with lots of publicly traded and private companies, that a key first step to doing this, it's really necessary, is to map the organization through the lens of carbon. So take the entire operation and look at it through this carbon lens. And a lot of companies have not done that before. To do that, you need to first understand emissions. An organization has, first of all, Scope 1 emissions, and those are emissions that are owned and operated or controlled by the company. Those might be things such as a company's fleet or a company's facilities. The other types of emissions are Scope 2 emissions. Those are indirect emissions, and they are purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling for the company to use. So for example, you might turn on the lights at your facilities and you're using and purchasing electricity for your facilities, but the actual emissions are happening at the power plant. And then finally, you have Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that are not owned or controlled by your company, but your company has an impact on them through the value chain. So that might be your upstream activities or your downstream activities. And you're talking about things such as your business travel, your purchased goods and services, and maybe your leased assets, and among the other things that you see here in the picture. Now, as you can imagine, collecting all of this information can be difficult because it is scattered throughout systems and also people that are both inside your organization and outside of your organization. So you can see all of the different things here from the GHG protocol that you have to look at and collect. Now, this can take a lot of painful people hours to do. It can be complicated and it requires some science-based methodologies to do it. And at Sustainabase, one of our core missions is to make sure that you don't spend your valuable time doing that messy data, that you spend your company's valuable time actually making the world better, bolstering your brand, reducing risk, and doing all of those things that need to be done. And so how do we help you do that? The first thing that we do is that we have our data concierge service, and this is a full service data collection. So everything from manual data entry that you can avoid doing to having automated repeatable processes for collecting data, the right methodologies that are protocol compliant, an inventory management plan, and accuracy in your data that you can feel confident is verifiable and auditable and that you can report out to the world. Now, once you have all of that information, of course, we've saved a lot of time because we've tried to automate, et cetera. Then the next step is to put a lot of good protocol compliant data into a dynamic system that allows you to manage that carbon, water, waste, or all the other metrics that you might be collecting, and you can identify hotspots. When you look at carbon and you see in your organization where those carbon hotspots are, then you can set targets to reduce those areas that are meaningful and will have a big impact. The other thing that's good about finding those hotspots with real good data is that you can then create reduction targets and actually track progress towards your reductions with good data that you can see whether you need to course correct or whether you're on the right track. And you also then feel confident that you can take this information and report it out to the world to whatever standard you might be reporting out to. And it's all being done in a protocol compliant way that you can verify. And so we're really thankful to be a part of this conversation with you today. The mission of considering how to minimize carbon emissions in every decision we make, I know is a big part of the Green Software Foundation's mission, and it's also a big part of ours at Sustainabase. And I hope that this presentation was helpful to you to get to that mission. If you have any questions about what I just talked about, please feel free to reach out at gaida@sustainabase.com. I'm happy to chat. And I hope this was helpful, and thanks again for having us.
Hi, I am Jenny Morgan, and I will be speaking about sustainable events and workshops and what are the better practices that you can use in sharing all of the knowledge you've obtained in the Green Software Foundation Global Summit. So let's get started. As you all are learning more about sustainable practices within development and design, how are you going to share those learnings with your communities? There are key strategies you can implement to hold sustainable events and workshops. First and foremost, there's got to be trust and transparency. So if you're learning along the way, share that with your audience. Greenwashing can be incredibly misleading, and none of us are looking for perfection. This is an opportunity for us to progress together and learn from one another. And everyone that is participating in your event or your workshop should be aware of that. There should be a commitment from all parties. So if you're leveraging vendors or if you're working with other partners, their commitment to sustainability and educating your audience should be aligned with what you're looking to do in your workshop. So whether you're speaking to the venue or you're integrating other forms of information or looping in another partner or stakeholder, make sure that you all are aligned from the very start. Virtual accessibility is key. So we're entering into a hybrid world. Not everyone is online and not everyone is in person. So there has to be a virtual aspect to every opportunity and event that you are offering to your community. That way you can bring the content to the globe. Individuals can watch your content and connect with you in another time, whether they're available at another time or they need to take some time to kind of digest what you're teaching. So keep those virtual streams going. And then when possible, focus on zero waste and carbon negativity. So you can do that by reusing, recycling, and making sure that you're not producing any waste within your event or workshop. And then your event or workshop is going to produce a carbon footprint. So partner with other vendors that can help you reach carbon negative results so that you can offset anything that you're unable to control by just simply being a lead and bringing people together. So what do those look like? There are the 7 R's of sustainable consumption when it comes to events and workshop. And you can take a look at these, but some of them that really resonate with me specifically is rethinking the way that you look at deliverables and how you present content. What are some ways that you can minimize your impact? Refuse to accept anything else. So this is your opportunity to start fresh and start fresh from the start. So refuse anything that is going against what you're trying to achieve in your workshops. And then repair, reduce, recycle, and reuse any sort of equipment or swag or anything like that that you need to make your experience memorable. Try to make sure that we're not using single-use plastics or bringing in anything that is not necessarily and will only be used one time. And then reward yourself, reward your attendees, and reward your partners on putting together a sustainable event and workshop. So from the start, you need to be thinking about sustainability because you've got your content, you've got your workshop, you've got your goals for what you're looking to achieve, but then start that from the very beginning and align your objectives and your performance indicators on what you're deeming a successful experience and start from the beginning. So incorporate sustainability, inclusion, track your progress, make sure that you're able to measure your results and review data before, during, and after the fact. And tell your story to your colleagues. What went right? What went wrong? What were you excited about? What was the most challenging? Those are all things that will not only help you continue to evolve as a leader in your community, but then also bring others along with the journey. I mentioned inclusivity as a key aspect of experiences, and that should definitely be equal or even more important than anything else. So environmental equity is key in making sure that not only are we providing sustainable experiences for our audience, but everyone is experiencing the climate crisis equally. And that's what equity is all about. We're all in this together. We're all participants, and so we all must participate equally. So have diverse planning committees engaged on what you're presenting so that they can highlight some areas where we can be more culturally inclusive, inclusive to others, inclusive to ones that might have more education on your topic versus others. Make sure that you've got a code of conduct and that you're integrating respect and responsibility throughout your entire workshop. And make sure that you're performing audits so that you're keeping yourself accountable. And then last but not least, continue to challenge yourself and challenge past expectations. So that's out of those 7 R's I mentioned earlier. Rethink what used to be done and what should be done. Continue to look at what you're doing. What's good about this content? What's working? What could be better? How could I make sure that this is inclusive across languages? How can I be more sustainable? What partners should I be looking at next time? Those are all things that you should be continuing to question as you take this learnings from this summit and bringing it forward to your communities. Get creative. You can also, do fun experiments too. For instance, if you don't want to have swag at your event anymore, just because it can make a pretty large, not necessary footprint from your workshop. Maybe there's mentorship opportunities. Maybe you can connect an audience member with an expert or someone that would be really a great opportunity for them to learn more. These long experiences that really facilitate community engagement are going to be the most memorable. So make sure that you're continuing to think more, think broad, incorporate your community members, and find resources to support what you're doing. I've listed some here. There's some GitHub repositories that are available that have playbooks, checklists, and processes in place that can help you be the most successful content lead. And I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of your global summit.
The carbon footprint of food waste in the US is greater than that of the airline industry. According to the National Resource Defense Council, food waste is responsible for the equivalent of 37 million cars. That's 1 in 7 cars. It's a subject that's often discussed in the context of food insecurity, but when it comes to climate sustainability, it's hardly front and center. My name's Matt Wampler, and I'm the co-founder of ClearCogs. We're a startup that focuses on using predictive demand forecasting to help restaurants reduce food waste. Now, when I was asked to give this software or this talk for the Green Software Summit, my immediate reaction was panic. What does an ex-sandwich maker with an online certificate in programming have to offer a group that's at the forefront of technology and sustainability? Now, last night, I was having dinner with one of our front-end developers, and he mentioned the concept of writing greedy code. When I asked him about it, he said that when he needed to do something quick, which in the startup world happens far more often than I'd like, and often I'm the cause of it, that he'd have to write code that was the best option in front of him. It may not be the optimal solution, but it more or less gets the job done. Now, I couldn't help but draw on the similarities to my years as a restaurant operator. So often, the easiest answer for operators is to prep way too much food because they lack the time, tools, and energy to figure out what they really need for the day. The inevitable outcome, a lot of waste. Now, our mission is to fill that gap, fill that need with a more efficient option for our clients. And when I think about green software development and what it means for those who really want to make an impact, I can't help but hearken back to the similarities. And so I leave you with this. What can you do to make the greedy solution the green solution? I hope you all have had a great summit, and I wish you all the most success helping change the world and the future of the software industry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Su. I'm a site reliability engineer with Goldman Sachs. I'm also the organization lead and chair for the Principles and Patterns project with the Green Software Foundation. Today, we want to share with you our journey on forming a green software engineering group from bottom up in a financial services firm. Technology engineering plays a pivotal role in supporting and enabling the business functions of Goldman Sachs. As software engineers in the firm, we would like to share our journey from discovering the principle of green software to propagating the concept and knowledge to the wider engineering community in the firm, with an aim to influence and adopt these principles into the way we build green software.
I have always been intrigued as to how a software engineer can help with the accelerated climate change issues. Sometime last year, I remember going to one of Sarah's talk about green software engineering. I reached out to her to learn more about the topic and expressed the interest of forming a group to take a deep dive into the subject. And that is how I know Sarah. Not long after, a few of us in the firm got together with the initial intention to see what we can do to raise awareness to the concept of building green software within the firm's engineering community. We soon formed a working group, which are still very much active and alive a year later. We are incredibly fortunate to have received tremendous support from the various senior leaders in the firm, including having their sponsorship to be able to join the Green Software Foundation. We also have many passionate engineers from different regions and divisions who are really interested in the topic and keen to contribute. We will continue this journey with the hope that green software principles will be one of the top things in people's mind when software is designed, built, deployed, and used.
Joining on the ground floor of the GS Green Software Foundation has been an amazing experience. It's been great to see the growth of the initiative internally and externally due to all the hard work of everyone in the group. I, like many others, was introduced to the foundation by Sarah and very quickly understood the potential effect that the foundation could have at GS. Working on the measurement project has taught me a lot about the scale of our engineering infrastructure and how generating statistics on our current carbon output can provide us with a method of tracking how much greener our infrastructure can be in the future. I look forward to seeing the progress of our projects, new and old, and the positive impact it can have on GS and the environment.
I was first introduced to the Green Software Engineering Group by an enthusiastic Sarah, whose presentation made me realize there is a lot in my profession I can do to fight climate change. The GSE group has been a very welcoming, encouraging, and collaborative space that is constantly learning, growing, and looking at various ways to make an impact. Having been introduced to the Green Software Foundation via this group, I have been able to have a bird's eye view of all the development happening in the green software space. I look forward to contributing to the measurements project under Sue and seeing the positive change that this group brings through its various initiatives.
Hi, so I'm Indy and I run a global team that manages the platform for our fixed income, currencies, commodities, and equities businesses. This estate amounts to hundreds of thousands of cores of compute globally. And given that technology forms one of our core business operations, and in many cases as a differentiator, a huge emphasis is placed on the efficiency and performance of this platform. With data and compute growing near exponentially over the past few decades, this places a great emphasis on managing growth. That said, the world has placed an ever greater emphasis on managing carbon emission. This has added a level of dimensionality never previously considered, and as an engineer places fascinating constraints when architecting for performance and efficiency. Being a part of this group of like-minded individuals wanting to play their part in affecting change has been refreshing. And we are all cognizant we have only scratched the surface. What is particularly exciting is that software engineers can make meaningful impact on world carbon emissions. And the route to get us there is being formed as we speak. Would you like to be part of that journey?
One of the things Sarah and I talked about when I first met her was green software engineering. Sarah's enthusiasm encouraged me to want to help the foundation and see where we could go with it. As someone with a non-technical background, I was skeptical as to what I would be able to contribute, but there's actually a lot I can get involved in within the foundation. The other foundation members have been eager to collaborate with us and have created a very inclusive environment. I look forward to seeing what kind of changes we can make as a team.
It was a little over 18 months ago that I first heard of green software engineering from Sarah. At the time, it seemed like such an abstract concept, and I wondered, how is this even a thing? But it was the possibility of being able to use my knowledge to be able to contribute to the fight against climate change rather than just the small everyday things that really intrigued me. Yet, once I understood the principles, it all seemed so blatantly obvious in how all of us, as engineers, can make an impact. Fast forward a year later, and there has been so much progress, both internally and externally, that I am proud to be a part of the group and look forward to what we can accomplish together in the future.
Thanks for listening. It's great to hear from engineers across teams and divisions on how we are playing our part in seeing green software engineering become an integral part of our daily activities. Bring us a step closer in changing the culture of building software across the global tech industry so sustainability becomes a core priority to software teams.
Hello, everyone. This is Srini here, and thanks for joining me in this session. In this session, we'll talk about how to calculate SCI for cloud web apps, and we will focus on the formula and some of recommendations coming out of the case study in this session. To give a quick preview into the agenda, we will spend a couple of seconds or maybe a little bit more on the formula. We will also talk about the example scenario we are using, which is the eShop on web, a standard web application protocol based, loaded in GitHub. And we'll talk about the software boundary and how are we doing the energy calculations, which is essentially leading to the overall SCI calculations. And then we'll wind it off by calling out recommendations and links that you can take forward as you try to do the same formula calculations for your own web applications. I'm taking an assumption that all of you must be familiar with the SCI formula, but we'll just spend a couple of seconds here. The SCI formula consists of three main parts. One is the energy, which is the energy emitted by the software as it runs on either an on-prem machine or the cloud. I represents the regional carbon intensity, which is related to whether the on-prem or cloud providers running on fossil fuels or renewable, and the number is reflective of that fact. M represents the embodied emissions, which is the manufacturing emissions associated, and R represents the scaling factor. The slide will be a good graphic for you to delve deep, and if you need more information, the website will have more details on the SCI formula. The case study we have chosen is a web-based application written in ASP.NET. It has a backend ASP.NET. It has a backend SQL Server, which is the relational database, and it's a shopping cart application, a very common application that we have seen used across multiple technologies. In this context, we have deployed it in Azure, and if you see the architecture, we have used managed services like app services, Azure SQL, storage accounts, but you could easily replace it with either an IaaS-based service or a serverless service, or you could replace it with equivalent services from any of the other cloud providers or your own web applications. The deployment model and the calculation model are reflective in the inclusions and exclusions we are used in the formula. So if we look at the subsequent slide, this represents what we have included in the formula and what we have not. We have included the emissions associated with the app server, database server, and the client device, be it a laptop or desktop. We have excluded for now, and this is please understand that this is an ongoing exercise to iteratively improve the formula calculations. We have excluded the network traffic and the emissions associated with transfer of gigabytes over the internet, and also the test infrastructure, which are the lower environments like dev test performance environments for this calculation. And we'll dive deep right down into how we have done the energy calculations. We have chosen a measurement model instead of just modeling using an estimation. And the formula we are using is depicted in the slide here, but the approach is the key. We have assumed that the application is deployed into Azure, and we have used load test, which is a measure of how to calculate the performance of an application. We have used the same approach, considering that is used to model how an application runs in production. And if we have run this over different app service and virtual machine configurations to calculate utilization, which is how much power is required, how much power is drawn by the software from the electricity grid to run the software, and that is reflective of either the CPU power consumption, the memory power consumption, or the GPU. In this case, GPU is not included because we have not picked up a GPU-based resource. And if you see the formula and the calculations, for an 1 hour period, the software is emitting about 0.023 kilowatt hours. And how we are using this formula, this is the energy calculation E part. It's in the SCI final calculations, which is basically E times I plus M. And the same calculation that we saw in the previous slide is reused for the app server, the database server, and the client device. So we are seeing that for a 1 hour period, the software is emitting 50.4096 gram carbon dioxide equivalent of the overall carbon emissions. And that is something that you can extrapolate for either a 1 hour period or the entire 1 year, however you want to do the reporting. We are at a point where we are continuously iterating to expand these emission calculations. Today, we are collaborating with the SCI Open Data Project to get more inputs on carbon emissions associated with the networking piece and the manufacturing cost of the memory as well. Also, we want to call out to the specific cloud providers and the original equipment manufacturers that we have seen that we can get better SCI accuracy if we get information around the processor families that they're using in their managed services or the virtual machines. And also it would be better if we get officially documented manufacturing emissions from the parts that they are using for the configuration of their data centers. To wind up this session, we are providing some links here which will help you go back and do these calculations for your respective software. Also, please keep in mind that this is an ongoing exercise, and we are also looking at expanding this SCI calculations to more standard APIs to be able to get more accurate calculations. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about this case study that we have done, and have a good rest of the summit. Thank you.
What a great lineup of lightning talks. I love them all. Each one of them had a different perspective to green software. I have to say though, as an owner of a farm and someone that's applied the SCI to my little Farm Insights program, I was a little partial to the discussions around food. So there were a few of those actually. Jenny Morgan made what a great talk that was, talking about green events and practices and things you can do in that arena. And I would even add something to that, such as when you're catering those events, ask your caterers if they're using local farmers in the food that is local to your area, so it doesn't have to travel 1,500 miles to make it to you. So what did you think, Sarah?
My least favorite is obviously mine, because watching yourself is so cringe.
Yeah, fabulous.
But it's definitely really, really great to see the selection of different lightning talks there were, coming from software engineering all the way to like event planning. And one point I really want to add on top of like non-software engineering specific is that a lot of the questions we got so far when we give like green software engineering talk is that people will ask like, but I'm not an engineer, what can I do? What can I help? How do I participate? And that's one point I really want to make. And then it's really great. I got the community chairs here with me that is the right working group for you to get in touch with if you are not as technical as a software engineer, but you are like in this fight with us to like reach, and you would like to contribute. For example, Michaela from Goldman Sachs, she mentioned like she's not technical, but she has been so helpful from organizing the events. Now she actually goes around to talk about principle of green software to other people, and she's actually talking to like a group of like 15-year-olds in the UK in common weeks, and they come up with a great game just to get people to start thinking about green software, but in a much more like not technical ways. So that's one point I really want to make, that you can participate. You don't need to be engineers, and us engineers, like we are built on top of you guys. Like we wouldn't be here. The software product wouldn't be here without everyone else, like project managers, you know, project lead and all that. So, but yeah, Anne, what do you think?
Well, I will echo what you've said. In many ways, our powers as software engineers are to not do any software engineering. It's we don't want to solve this with software engineering. We want to solve this with other powers. I did really enjoy the talks. It was interesting to see them back to back. Something that immediately sprang to mind was that a couple of the talks highlighted two things which are quite interesting for me. There were talks side by side about changes that you could make that would help things, but were really quite hard to make or quite destabilizing for your systems and a really hard sell. And at the same time, then they would talk about something that was actually a vastly easier sell to make and would stabilize your systems and cost you less time. So for example, I enjoyed the first talk, the chap with the pyramid at the beginning, and he talked about auto scaling into different regions. And I thought, well, it's a lovely idea. It's the kind of thing that would you know, I would love that if people could successfully do it, but it would be quite destabilizing, quite a lot of work to do that. And the chap after talks about, well, actually, even the pyramid guy talked about other things like using managed services that were already greener, like serverless. The chap afterwards talks a bit more about cleaning up your old data, just doing less, because doing less means you use less power and your systems become more resilient and you have less work to do. So again, it's a much easier sell. It's a good place to start. So yeah, we need to, I think to start with, need to be thinking about what are those wins that we can make that do not require us to write any code, require us to write less code and make our systems more resilient. Not the ones, and for the ones that are actually going to be a lot of work, I would say push that back to your supplier. So rather than say, could I write my own orchestrator, my own multi-region orchestrator for Azure or AWS or whatever that's going to move my workload to a low carbon region, I would say, blimey, don't do that. I would have told my engineers not to do that under any circumstances. I would say go to AWS or Azure and say, can I have an orchestrator that will do this? Don't attempt to write it. That's a very hard sell to make. And it's an interesting thing. This is one where as an entry-level engineer, it's the kind of thing you might propose, but as a more experienced architect, it's the kind of thing you would stamp all over, and for very good reason.
Yeah, those are all great points and really interesting. You know, I really liked Sharini's use case that he presented. I know there was a lot of discussion in the standards working group around his use case, and because it's very common and it involves you know, web app services and database, and it's definitely a great jumping off point for folks that are software engineers to take a look at his use case and to kind of work off of that and the score that he actually had, and then look at ways to reduce that score. Right? So what are your KPIs when you are building software, and how do you incorporate that into, you know, your development project all the way through to, you know, how you deploy it, your pipelines, how do you maybe go through and reprocess those scores or recalculate every time you build to see what your scores are and how you might reduce them, along with even page counts, right? Reducing the number of pages and working offline. And there's lots of strategies and practices that are coming out. And, you know, with the great minds of everyone on this call, how do we just accelerate all of that?
I think that's a great opportunity for me to advertise a little bit more on the Principles and Patterns and Practices project. As everyone knows, so we have principles. They were originally created by ASIM in 2019, and the field of green software has evolved dramatically over since 2019. And so we have just finished updating the principles, and we sort of like summarized it from 8 principles to 6 principles. The principles of green software basically form a set of competencies for anyone in tech to learn and understand. So we are empowered to define, build, and run green software. So green software is about like how you can do things. And now we have patterns about how we actually apply the principles to a specific use case. Right, and that's where you guys can come in. Exactly what Bill was saying. Like, we require your merge request to our repo for us to build up this online open source database of how we actually do things, because I think everyone here would like experience the same thing. We talk about the principle of green software. We talk about how to achieve green software, but people always ask like, what do I do? I have a MacBook 2016, but what do I do? But it's just like we don't specifically have a collection, a centralized place for us to collect all this useful advice. So I just want to say we are starting our patterns side of the project very soon, and you will be able to submit all these great patterns that you came across throughout your day-to-day working activities.
So Sarah, and I might be completely wrong here, so feel free to correct me. In my mind, principles are a bit about like dev. They're what you do at dev, and patterns are more ops, how you operate things. But am I totally wrong there? I think slightly not quite correct. Is that polite enough? That's fine. I disagree. I'm joking. So I guess like in principles, we try to keep everything quite light, just because we are targeting like a 101 course, because like the biggest bottleneck of like adopting green software practices is a lack of knowledge, and we don't have this like shared common language for us to discuss green software in a sufficient manner. So that's how, I guess that's why ASIM and Co created the principles back then, and now that has evolved. And another point to add on top of that is that we are now actually going to turn principles into certifications, and that's another way for organizations to increase like market value, and to increase like so they can have like a method to evaluate green software talent, so everyone have like a baseline of knowledge. And for the patterns, I think it's not just to the ops people, because there should be some software writing patterns that we are going to start collect. So for example, I think someone mentioned is that if you have like some map in your website or something, like try link it instead of actually putting Google Map, like rendering in your app. So I think that's probably not an ops issue, but also like a writing software issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally does. There's Oh no,
go ahead, sorry.
There's a quick comment from Ricky, who did say something about, you know, how he thinks it's not a hard sell to develop software which is more sustainable. And I agree with him, because sustainable software is often more performant, right? Because you're doing everything that you can to reduce the load that is happening either on servers or resources, and adopting even a mobile first approach, right? So if you're thinking about that user who's going to be using the software and what they have to download on their mobile device, it really puts you into a different mindset, and exactly kind of incorporates some of the things you were talking about, Sarah. So I don't think I agree. I don't think it's a hard sell for organizations to begin to look greener. Anne?
Well, I think it depends. It depends on your application, depends on your what your business is aiming to achieve. I mean, I used to work in high performance software, and of course everything had to be high performance. That was the that was the point. If it wasn't, it didn't work. So it was always worth investing in. And see, at the time, nowadays it would probably be Rust. But and it was an easy sell to make. But there are other businesses where it's more about getting stuff done quickly than it is about being particularly performant. So it's horses for courses. It depends who you're selling to and what are your business needs and requirements, I would say. So I agree, it's not always a hard sell.
Okay, well, do we have any questions from the chat at this point? Any comments? I know there's a lot of information in the chat with links to articles and different papers.
There's one question. How far are we from a label for green software? And you take this one, and you can take this one.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, quite a long way. That's the goal. That's where we'll be eventually. But at the moment, quite a long way. So there are the confusingly similarly named Green Web Foundation. So one of our leadership team, Chris Adams, who was on the panel earlier, is on the leadership team of the Green Web Foundation. Now they do have green ticks and green labels for websites that run very efficiently. So it already exists for websites, but not necessarily for software. And I think that that's certainly a goal that we all have in mind, that we'd like to have that. But at the moment, we're quite some way off, I would say. So don't immediately hold your breath.
I think there's another question. Germany and Hong Kong governments are ahead. Where do the UK and USA government lie on the green software spectrum?
That's a very good question.
Not great, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. I was going to say I haven't seen anything myself in relation to the green software in the US. The first I even heard of the concept was through Asim Hussein's MS Learn course that he had on the principles, and that, you know, as someone that tries to do everything I can to live my life sustainably, it really resonated with me. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's this whole world that just opened up for me in my profession where I can make an impact. So, and as a result of hopefully the efforts of GSF and all of you that we can do greener things together. What about you, Anne or Sarah?
And you go. But I would just want to say I was in the exact same boat as you, Tammy, that after hearing about Principle of Green Software, we probably watched the same talk that Asim gave on YouTube, that I feel, wow, there's actually I can use what I'm good at to help tackle climate change. It was very enlightening. And what do you think? Is the UK government nearly there?
No, I think we're a long way off. I think the UK government is a long way off. To be honest, it isn't where attention is focused at the moment. So I don't think, again, don't hold your breath there. I would say that we're much more likely to see EU action before we see action from either the US or the UK, which is sad and a shame. But you know, what we learned from the GDPR is that actually EU action is really quite effective. It does force worldwide change because the EU is a big market with a lot of fancy people with cash to spend in it. So I think that's probably where we'll see the movement first, the government movement first.
Yeah. There was a follow-up question on the labels. It says, what would you include in a label? That is a good question. What would you include in a label?
I think on top of my mind, I think some of the variables from SCI, the calculation might be useful. So, for example, like the marginal carbon output,
Yes,
carbon, some of those things, even though those data are like impossible and so difficult to get, but that just on top of my mind. And what do you think?
Well, the marginal rating of electricity is a very interesting one, because it does make a huge difference to how dirty an application is. You know, you could be running one that uses tons of power, but if there's loads of green power available, then fine, you know, fill your boots. So I think that's probably the next thing we need to get our hands on, is what's a good time to run things, not just for the software industry, across, you know, what's the best time for me to be running my dishwasher, or filling up my car, or with electricity, or whatever. It's that, when is the best time?
Yeah, and of course the SCI calculation, right, in that label. There's another question from Bill, well, from the chat. It says, is there an AI or way of calculating the amount of CO2 emitted by software, computer, or phone? So that's an interesting question. I know there are multiple groups, Microsoft included, that is working on carbon aware SDKs, and those projects are available through our GitHub repo. So the information is out there, and if you'd like to contribute, of course, you can contact us through that as well. So there's lots of information, lots of activity on the way for calculating the CO2. So I would say more to come on that.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to add one point, is that the embodied carbon, that's that you guys probably have heard so many times by attending the summit over the past 2 weeks, but just a quick recap. Embodied carbon is the carbon produced during creation, disposal of a device. And for some of the devices listed in the chat, computer, phone, I think computer and phone, so those type of end user devices, the carbon of actually executing software on the device is so insignificant compared to the embodied carbon of actually creating and disposing of the device. So I guess that's one way software engineers in the end user space can do, is to make sure that the software you run actually works okay in older models, so people are not like incentivized to keep buying new.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Don't let your software be the final nail in the coffin of working hardware. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. And partly that might be about not stopping releasing security patches and things like that, so that people are forced to upgrade their phones and throw away something that works very well and has a ton of embodied carbon in it. On measuring the CO2 output from particular software applications, I hear a lot of good stuff about a tool called, I've just dropped it in the chat, Scafandra, which is an open source project, which is specifically targeting individual applications running on your own hardware. So it's not really, it's not the same as cloud measuring, but it's apparently useful. It's apparently French for diving bell. Scafandra. So it's worth taking a look at that.
Very good. So we do have another question from earlier in the chat. At a company level, carbon needs to be a part of the KPIs to ensure sustainability and technology. What are some measures, metrics for CIOs, CTOs to best track the digital footprint of their technology stack? Interesting question. Thoughts on that, Anne?
Well, as I say, there's Scafandra if you're measuring individual applications where you have control of the hardware. I think all of the cloud providers now do theoretically provide a tool which will give you a rating and a score for your cloud run applications. Now, I'm told that those are all quite basic. But then, I will draw your attention again to the point that if you use it and you say you want it to have more stuff in it, it will probably have more stuff in it in future. But if we don't ask, we don't get. So we need to start using those tools and then asking for them to do more for us.
And of course, you know, measure, right? Use the SCI, the software carbon intensity, apply that to your software, your platforms, get those numbers, you know, raise it as a KPI at your executive level, but use them whenever you're developing software, and try to continuously look for ways to reduce those numbers with anything new or existing, right? Understanding what your software, what your SCI number is for your software is the first great step towards that. Right, Sarah?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Sorry, I'm just gonna reread the questions again. So what are some measures and metrics for CIOs and CTOs to best track their digital footprint of their technology stack? This is, I agree with both what Anne and Tammy has mentioned, but this is a very, very, very difficult things to actually measure. But I guess because so many companies have now come forward to make really encouraging and inspiring climate commitments, and people will eventually be audited on those commitments, right? So it's something we will need to do, and that's why we need a place like the foundation that is a trusted ecosystem for people to work on how do we actually measure things. I think Asim mentioned when he first started the foundation, basically every single member organization say the pain point is we don't know how to measure. Like, what is the number? We need a number to convince others to do the right thing. Like, we keep talking about the principles, how we actually be more green, but no one actually cares that much unless you show them evidence. So I guess, like, going back to previously what I said, like, hopefully this is like a great incentive for you to join the foundation, to work on some projects, and then we are like cumulatively, I think that's a wrong word. Anyway, we all work on this SCI together. So hopefully one day we will provide easy and accessible measurement to your CIOs and CTOs.
Well, I know that I slagged off hosting cost in the panel as a way of kind of persuading people to move to greener software and more efficient software. But in the absence of anything else, it is actually at the moment probably the best measurement that you have for how much carbon you are producing is your hosting bill. If you have a lower hosting bill, you're probably producing less carbon. Now it's not absolutely perfect, because if you're running in some regions, then you're worse than in other regions. So you might be paying the same amount to host in France, where it's mostly powered by nuclear, as you would be in Virginia, where it's mostly powered by burning coal. And so, you know, it's not absolutely perfect as a measurement of how much carbon you're producing, but it's, as a rule of thumb, it's not bad. The higher your bill, the more carbon you're producing.
There's a really interesting question in the chat. So, what impact does the programming language you use have in green software? Is it worth rewriting all or parts of your code in another language? Anne?
Well, this used to be my job. If I would love it to say, yes, rewrite in C or rewrite in Rust, because in theory, yes, if you rewrite your applications in a more efficient language, you can quite feasibly cut your CPU use and therefore your carbon emissions in most cases by 100-fold. You know, that's not difficult to achieve compared to a looser, more easier to use language. But it takes you a heck of a long time to do that, and the application will be much more difficult to change in the future. So I do sometimes recommend that people do it, because if you've got a tool that's running all the time, that has to run on demand, so it will sometimes have to run when there's no green power available. So things like a service mesh, for example, something that is really intense, runs all the time, potentially can use a lot of power, then it's probably worth rewriting, or it might be worth rewriting that application in a much more efficient language like Rust. But if it's something that you can just time shift, then there's absolutely no reason for you to invest in rewriting it in Rust. Just invest in a better orchestrator and tweak around with the SLAs or the UI so that you can move that job in time. Things like machine learning, you don't have to run those on dirty power. You can just delay it and run it when there's green power available. But some stuff has to run on demand, and it's more important that that stuff is efficient than stuff that you can time shift.
Right. Those are all great points. Thanks, Anne. So the call of action today is one, be team all the things, right? And figure out how to make sustainability a part of your own lives. But with regards to sustainability, become a green software practitioner in whatever way that you can, in whatever capacity, but contribute to the principles, patterns, and practices. Sign up for your local community meetup groups. Go to the Join Us page for Green Software Foundation. Find us in GitHub, in the repos there, and there's going to be a slide if there's not. Oh, and there it is, with some additional links to how you can become involved and things that you can do. We absolutely want to hear from you, and we want to accelerate the idea of green software. Yeah, so I think this wraps it up for this very first edition of the Green Software Foundation Global Summit. I would like to thank my co-hosts for a fantastic time today. Sarah and Anne, thank you so much. Also want to thank our earlier host sessions, Kelsey Hart and Latchkey. Thanks to all the folks who participated in the panel discussions and lightning talks from around the world. It's been an amazing experience. There's nothing better than talking about green software with like-minded folks like Sarah and Anne and all of you. So I want to send out a very special thank you to Jenny Morgan for all of her brilliant efforts in planning and organizing and helping with all the events from around the world, and just truly being an awesome person. So thank you, Jenny. And thank all of you for participating. And remember that you are all trailblazers in this mission to change the culture for building green software. So let's go change the world and have a great day.